Next, from Springfield, we speak one-on-one with Dr. Brent Clark, who heads the Illinois Association of School Administrators. Dr. Clark talks about the recently passed reform bill and its impact on school administrators and students. We'll also hear his thoughts on whether schools are overly regulated. This runs about 45 minutes. Dr. Brent Clark, Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Administrators. Thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
One of the pieces of legislation that passed in the spring 2011 session of legislature was an education reform bill. And we wanted to talk to you in part about what does that mean as we begin this fall school year for those who are administering our public schools?
Well, what you're going to see, and we're already seeing this now, is that there's a great deal of training that is now underway, just started in the last few weeks for administrators, and will be starting soon for teachers, I believe. And we're going to be trained on the aspects of Senate Bill 7. And really the implementation dates are in the future. But what we're seeing is September 1st, 2012 will be a time when all school districts need to move to what we call a rating system that has 4 different categories instead of the current categories, or just 3 categories currently. So we're going to see that phase in by next fall, September 12th, for certain schools, those that are the lowest performing schools. And then there's other staggered dates out through the future where this begins to implement into all schools.
You say the categories, what would those categories be, and what is the purpose of categorizing them?
One is the categories would be unsatisfactory, needs improvement, proficient, and superior. Those will be the 4 categories going forward. The reasons to have those is because in the new law, when a school district begins to look at what we call in our industry reduction in force, but practically speaking that's a layoff process. When the school district gets up to a point where they have to lay off people, in the future, using those 4 different performance categories, your performance will now count more than your seniority for purposes of layoffs.
Regarding teachers, predominantly, I guess.
Well, regarding teachers specific to this law, and that's always been that way historically for administrators. You're pretty much based on your performance as an administrator.
Right.
You're either performing or you're not.
So what's changing, I mean, just for the public, is the way teachers would be let go. I guess before it was predominantly on your tenure, or
it's been based on seniority in the district. Tenure is the acquisition of tenure in the district.
You're right. I meant seniority.
But the seniority is what really has been driving the decisions of who is let go, who's laid off, who's not. But the performance will now count to a greater degree than seniority, and you know, that's a big change within the bill.
You know, these ideas have been kicked around for a number of years, and one of the things that I've heard teachers worry about is it a subjective view? I mean, let's say there's just a personality conflict between an administrator and a teacher, and the teacher thinks they're doing an excellent job, but maybe their administrator doesn't like them. How do we weed that aspect out?
That's an excellent question, and one we have talked about and still are working on. We absolutely do not want it to come down to an issue of personality conflicts, or I've got a grudge to carry out. We want this to be based on the professional performance in the classroom of that teacher, of that administrator. And what we have is a system that's being set up that will allow for a second evaluator to come in to provide interrelated validity and reliability between those 2 evaluators on this specific teacher. We do not want to see it be used as some type of tool to get back at someone. We want it truly to be used as an instrument to improve the teaching process and the learning process and student growth. And that's what this Senate bill is really focused on.
Will there be, if let's say someone is designated to be let go, is there a shot over the bow, or is it one strike and you're out? Is there a process?
There's a process, and the process would entail more than one evaluation, of course. And so that's where the second evaluator comes into play. So you're evaluated if you're in that lowest category, and it does look like you're going to be let go for performance reasons. Then the second evaluator would come in and try to either establish that the initial evaluation is correct, or they may find problems with that first evaluation and say, no, I don't think you have this correct. I think you missed this, you missed this. And so then there begins to be a process to try to weed out any types of personal vendettas that may try to surface. This needs to be a really professional process.
I know some years ago we interviewed a journalist who had done a study of the teaching profession in Illinois. I think, if I remember the number, he said only 7 teachers were let go in the last year, and his comment was, no profession is that good, given the tens of thousands of people in it, that only 7 should be let go.
Well, I know that was kicked around as kind of a headline back when this bill was first introduced. I don't know if those facts are correct or not. I haven't personally seen that. But I would say that we've had a system in Illinois that didn't always have the best evaluation system that we could have provided in terms of feedback to the teacher to improve. And I think as a result of that system, lack of a system, we didn't always have those opportunities for the teachers to really rise to the occasion. I think that's what this provides, is that it really strengthens the whole process.
I don't want to spend all the time just on this one facet, but let me explore this. When we talk about seniority, of course, typically a teacher that will have been teaching for 20 or 25 years is going to be making the most money. Are we going to find that we're just letting go the high-paying teachers to save money, or how do we protect against that?
We talked about that specifically, and there's a provision in the new law that bars you from taking into account a person's salary and benefits when making any employment decisions, because we did not want to see that happen, because we knew that was a possibility. So we did not want to see budgets balanced based on the idea of, let's just let go of the higher paid faculty or the higher paid staff. We wanted to put that provision in there, and it's in there.
So before we leave this, what would you say to teachers in general who might be watching this and are obviously concerned?
Well, I would say it to both teachers and administrators. The importance of the evaluation has now been elevated to a very high level. The administrator that's performing that evaluation is at the eye of the storm. They're the linkage between that observation in the classroom and then carrying that back, and how does that tie to better student growth, or how does that apply to a layoff decision if one comes down the road. So there's a new importance on the evaluation process itself. Much more important, much more crucial, critical, whatever word you want to put there, than evaluations have been in the past.
I don't want to ask a too sensitive a question, but it just occurred to me. Is there protection for administrators if they say teacher A has to be let go, that they're not going to be sued, or that,
Well, you have of course school board legal liability insurance. You have professional conduct insurance. So that all comes out within what we call hearings. But typically, if they're within their normal scope of their work, their line of duty, that they're not subject to that.
And as far as the teacher, if they go through this evaluation process and they don't improve and they're let go, is there any appeal process, or once that decision's made, is that final?
Well, there is kind of a remediation period. So there's an initial evaluation, and we're really focused on the lowest performing, but you have to keep in mind there's some tremendous public educators out there that all perform at the high end. But we're talking about the lowest end here. So if you're in that unsatisfactory category, you would have a chance to remediate. And there would be a prescriptive plan for you to take specific actions and activities within a designated time period to remediate yourself. And then if that still wasn't remediable or still wasn't performing to par, then there would be another process to let that person be released.
So not to spend all the time just on that one facet, what are there other critical parts of the bill that it'll have an impact on school?
Well, I think just the overall idea of knowing that student growth, that knowing that performance is now tied to career, tied to your professional advancement, tied to your livelihood, was going to make all the players, the teachers, the administrators, all really elevate, I think, their game. And as a result of that, I think we're going to see children benefit from better schools, better teachers, better administrators, better climate, and hopefully just better outcomes and opportunities for them in a large sense.
Before we go on to some of the other areas I'd like to talk about, why don't we take a little time to tell us about the Illinois Association of School Administrators. Tell us about what is it your organization does and how many members do you have?
Well, we have about 2,000 members. We represent school administrators statewide, so that's from the Wisconsin border down to Cairo, from Iowa, Missouri, over to Indiana. And we have a mission here of maximum educational success for all kids. And so we do a variety of things. Primarily, we get out and we train administrators to be leaders, to be visionary, to have a plan, to not just show up and hope something happens, but to have a plan, make something happen. And so our professional development arm is really critical to making sure our leaders are on the cutting edge and doing the best job they can out in the field. The other things we do are large scale. We do purchasing of natural gas and electricity. And then we do a money management, fund management for school districts. We do a very large insurance pool. All things on a large scale designed to be done by a statewide entity that can then turn around and allow those savings to be realized by school districts that they otherwise wouldn't be able to pull off just being a single or a couple school districts put together.
Right. They
so
don't
those are some things we do. We also have a Director of Governmental Relations that ties into all the things that happen in the capital city relative to legislation and legislators, and that's a very important piece of what we do.
And communicate, obviously, the interest of your members to the lawmakers.
We sure do.
What are some of the things on your radar screen in general, not just for the spring session, but what are some of the issues that are critical within the educational arena as you look at them now?
Well, funding's always an issue. You're always concerned year to year on the amount of funds that are going to be allocated to school districts so that they know how to plan for the upcoming school year. School districts typically make personnel decisions in February and March, preceding the next school year. And you need to have some idea when you're in that planning stage of what your income, revenues are going to be for that next July through June cycle so that you know how to plan for personnel, for buildings, and for programs. So obviously, revenue streams are very important. Second would be other initiatives that are brought up by either constitutional officers or individual legislators. One that comes to mind would be the idea that Governor Quinn had on the forced consolidation of school districts back in his budget address. That's an issue that we're watching closely and we're going to be involved in. There's a commission, I think it's a 19 or 20 member commission that's going to be headed by the Lieutenant Governor, and we have a seat on that commission. And I think our work is, when I talked to Lieutenant Governor last week, I think our work's going to begin just probably the week or two after Labor Day, just coming up in about a month.
When you have 2,000 members, they're not all going to have the same opinion. So when we talk about school consolidation, I don't know, maybe they're 100% against it or for it, but how do you handle it as an executive director of an association when you have differences of opinion within the membership?
Well, let's use that example. There are varying opinions on school consolidation, but our position is this. We think that we're not against or for forced consolidation, but we think it should be decided by the local people. So if the local people are for consolidating, they ought to get a chance to vote for it. And if they're against it, they ought to get a chance to vote it down. And so that's the position, is that it should be a locally decided issue. And that in and of itself then divest that power back out to the membership and to the local communities.
You know, the Illinois Channel has covered a variety of issues in the educational arena for a number of years, and one of the issues we talked, which is tangential to education, is in Cook County on the juvenile justice system. And one of the probation officers said that something like 75% of their clients, the troubled children, came from 5 schools. So one of the issues, you know, when we go back to George Ryan's administration, he said, I want to be the education governor, and 51% of all revenue is going to go into schools. So often we hear the issue is money, and certainly money's a big factor.
Sure.
Relative to, on the other hand, tying in the juvenile aspect, so many times, too, we hear horror stories about a lack of discipline in the schools, and where teachers feel that they can't discipline or get control of the classroom. Is that an issue that you as a membership wrestle with? Is that an issue that in one way you try to communicate the needs, or what do we say to, I guess, taxpayers and parents who are saying, what good is to have more money if the classroom is out of control?
I couldn't agree more. Money doesn't solve everything. Money helps develop a plan as to how many teachers, what teachers and what programs you're going to be able to have next year, be able to offer. So money's not an end-all solution. There has to be effective people in the classroom. There has to be effective people leading the school districts, effective people in the buildings, setting the culture, the climate, the tone for those buildings. So there's some leadership responsibility there if those are problems that are occurring in 5 school districts. And I'm not familiar with that study. But
well, it was a comment, really. It's just a comment, kind of offhand from someone who works with juveniles.
I'm not even familiar with the comment. I hadn't heard that. So I would say if they have been able to reduce that down to identification of 5 school districts, that there should be some outreach to those 5 districts and say, look, we've been able to distill this problem down to it's coming from these 5 school districts, and let's develop a plan. Again, a plan is much more than I hope this gets better, or let's wait and see if it gets better. A plan that says, these are the steps we're going to take to be proactive in resolving an issue. And so I would, if I was that person, I would sit down with those 5 school districts and I'd develop a plan to address the issues that they're seeing coming out of those districts that are disturbing them, and see if there's some commonalities, some things that those school districts can share back and forth in terms of resources and concepts of dealing with those problems.
Relative to not just those schools, but anywhere where there's going to be, and there's always going to be some discipline problems.
Sure.
With
That's
children.
Part of being children and teenagers.
Right. Some are going to be obviously worse than others. And this might be where obviously, there's going to be issues where administrators are going to be on opposing ends of the teachers, maybe on an issue. You're probably going to be working in sync on this one. Everyone wants discipline in the classroom. Do the teachers, do the administrators currently have the tools they need to bring discipline to the classrooms, or is there something you would want lawmakers and the governor to know?
No, I think by and large, the tools that are necessary to have a good, positive school climate are available. I don't think there's any magic solutions that are escaping us here in terms of creating positive school environments. It's adults with the same mission, same mindset, wanting the best for kids, the best opportunities, all dedicated to delivering a great product, and performance being a part of that, which is Senate Bill 7. But I think we have the necessary tools to do these things. I don't think we need more legislative intervention. I think we need just, maybe less of that even. Just there's some abilities here. Turn these people loose and let them do it.
You just said what a question I was going to ask. We're talking about reform. Often times we may need reform. The
Right.
world changes, we need to adjust and always review. On the other hand, are we suffering from reform overload? Is there too many fingers in the pie?
You can get there. You can overload any system if you just continue to pound away and just add more change until a system can only absorb what it can absorb. If you keep laying things on it, you'll crush it before it can absorb it and put that into place. So we're very cognizant of that. We're even cautioning some people that are pushing more reforms that are coming around the corner. You need to let these reforms take root and be effective before you bring another round of reforms in. And the other thing that we get into, and I guess legislatively, is that we see a lot of unfunded mandates every year get introduced. And, they're just a range of things, all great ideas, but they take time, they take resources, and there's no time and resources to go along with them. So those, we have to get our views set on what's important, and a lot of things are important, but what has to be taking place in the school day has to be prioritized. And we can't fix every social ill, in the few hours that we have them in school. And so we have to prioritize those issues that come up each legislative session.
To that end, we did an interview with administrators in Washington, D.C. Back in February of '03. In fact, they had just fired like 800 teachers that Marion Barry had thrown into the classroom.
Washington, D.C. school district?
The Washington, D.C. school district. But one of the administrators I thought brought up something that stuck with me. He goes, you know, you'll have lawmakers mandate that we do something in the classroom. You know, asthma, he brought up, has been increasing. So now they mandate we have to teach about asthma. And he goes, well, that's fine. Maybe that's something they should know. But unless we expand the school day, what do we not teach to teach about asthma? Right. Do we take physics out? Do we take math out? Do we stop English? So you graduate and you know something about asthma, but maybe you're ignorant in math. Is that something we want to say to lawmakers, that you might individually be throwing these little chunks of good ideas, but unless you're going to be willing to expand the box of time to teach it, you know, you're really kind of screwing up the rest of the educational platform?
Well, you sum that up well, and that's kind of what I was alluding to. But the other thing is this: you can only expand the box so much, because if you're going to extend your school day and you're going to have people working more time, you're going to have to pay them to work more time. That's a fairness issue. The other thing is this: there's an absorption ratio here. How much can a child absorb in terms of new learning every day? If you overload him with trigonometry, physics, maybe a chemistry 1 class, a good strong English class, PE, art, and then you throw in asthma and 3 or 4 more mandates, how much can that child honestly learn in a 24-hour period? I mean, what can they retain? And so that's where the prioritization comes in terms of what we're doing in public schools. What do we need to really get done? A lot of these ideas are tremendous. They're well-intentioned, but there's just sometimes not enough time, physical time, to get that in, as well as everything else we need to cover.
On educational funding, and you alluded to a couple of things. One, there's just how much money are we spending? Sure. And secondly, we may have the money on paper, but when does the check arrive? The state of Illinois isn't sending the checks out on time. When you were talking about cash flow, and you say it makes sense. You want to be, if I was running a small business, I don't want to hire someone until I know I have the money to pay them.
That's right.
How bad is it, how difficult has it become for administrators when the checks are arriving very late? You don't know when they're going to be coming in for the administrators to be administering the schools, to be hiring teachers, and then trying to come up with payroll when the check isn't necessarily in the mail.
Well, it creates a lot of stress in the whole system. And let me run through that real quickly. It creates stress not only on the administrators, because they're charged with heading up the finance of the school district, the superintendents are, but then it creates stress as well on the Board of Education, who's elected by the community to oversee the school districts. It creates stress on the employees who may have been laid off for financial reasons, not for performance reasons, but laid off for financial reasons. And they're wondering, do I have a job next fall when school starts, or am I going to be unemployed? How do I provide for my family? So the stress goes in all directions, not just on the administrator, which it's high upon that person, because at the end of the day, everyone's looking to them to say, okay, how do we get through this? But it's high upon the board, it's high upon the employees, which has a stress effect upon communities. So that is a stressful situation. Now, I've always said that the school superintendents in Illinois are some of the smartest people I've ever met, because they find ways to just get the job done anyway. And they're really good at being able to craft budgets that will work if you'll tell them what they're going to get. But not knowing what the plan is the worst thing in the world. It's just every day is a brand new day. It's you're in the black, you're in the dark, you don't know where you're at. But if you know what you're going to get and you'll tell them up front, they'll make it work. They'll get the job done. So just communicating and telling a school district, here's what you can expect and here's when you can expect it, is very effective leadership from the state if they'll do that.
The regional superintendents, are they part of your membership?
They do belong, but they have their own specific association since they are an elected official.
Now, the viewers may need to be, I'll remind the viewers, the governor has recently vetoed out the funding for the regional superintendents.
That's correct.
And his point is, he just doesn't think it should be a state. He's managing the state budget. He goes, you know, this should be paid for, in his view, by the school districts.
Right.
What position does your organization have on that?
We've been very supportive of the regional superintendents. They are a locally elected official. They have both statutory and regulatory jobs that they must carry out. Currently there's no alternative to them other than them carrying those jobs out. They're good people. They work hard. They deliver an important service, and I think they're important to the overall delivery of education policy across the state. And if you look at it from an economical standpoint, I'm not sure if we scrapped the ROE system, the Regional Office of Education system, and tried to develop another intermediate delivery system out across the state, if it wouldn't cost you twice as much as what these folks are being able to deliver it for. So we're supportive of them, and we think that the governor needs to figure out a way to get them paid. They're good people, but we're going to start losing them to retirements, to other jobs, because they're just like most other people in life. They need to get paid for their work, and they have a family to support. They have themselves to support. They have a role to play, but they need a paycheck.
We often also hear, we'll pick up the paper or have a conversation with someone we know who's a teacher, where the teacher is in the classroom and they're paying money out of their own pocket to buy crayons or pencils. And as a taxpayer, I have often wondered, when you run the numbers and you say we're spending whatever it is, $5,000, $8,000 a year per pupil, how is it possible that that money doesn't start in the classroom and filter up maybe to the administrators? Some people think that, well, maybe we're skimming too much off on the administration and it's not getting down to the classroom. But why do we hear these stories, and just what's your take on that, I guess?
The idea of saying that the money is skimmed off and used for, you try to find buzzwords that are populist in their tone. So accusing...
I suppose, how does the money flow? And who determines how the money flows? And are we prioritizing where we spend our money? Who does all of that?
Those decisions are really made at the local level. So, for example, let's just take a school district, okay? That school district's going to receive their funding sources from primarily three revenue streams. One will be their property taxes. Two will be the state, what we call the state aid claim. And then there's some other categorical funding like transportation, special ed. And then there's federal money, which is really a small amount in the whole scheme of things. So a local school district, they'll set a tax rate that collects their property taxes locally. Then they turn in a general state aid claim based on attendance, percentage of attendance, and they turn that into the state. Then they're funded based on that. So that's their state aid money. Then federal monies are largely grant monies, Title I, Title II, Title IV, Title VI. Those are grant monies allocated on usually a per capita basis. So that money comes into a local school district. A budget is developed and then put on public display, and then approved by the locally elected Board of Education. So there's this budgeting process that takes place locally, and that each community then, or each school district, sets their budget and how they're going to spend their money according to their priorities. So when you hear the idea it's all skimmed off, that's a populist tone to try to gin up rhetoric, to cause people to have emotional feelings that are really based on untruths.
I guess I don't want to be unfair. It's just one wonders when you hear that, how is it possible that, given the money that's in the system, you would think that maybe you have to cut back on buying a new French horn for the band or something, but you would think you'd have at least pencils and papers in the classroom.
Well, here's the deal. I've been a school superintendent. I've been in this business for 20 years. You can cut out all the supplies and materials in a school district, and you still won't really make a dent in your cost. School district business, public education, is a very labor-intensive profession. 80 to 85% of school districts' monies are spent on salaries and benefits for the people they employ, because you've got to have people there to deliver the service. The rest of the budget is usually spent on buildings, maintenance of buildings, buses, food, and supplies. And in a nutshell, that's your budget. So you can cut out all the papers and paper clips and ink pens and even books and computers, and you're still not going to make a big dent in most school district budgets.
I don't mean to belabor this point. I'll just close out. I suppose, and if I guess what I was going to say, if supplies are that small of an area, one would think that that would never be underfunded then.
Ironically enough, when people start looking at making cuts, usually they turn there first because they can cut a supply and not.
Because it's easier to.
It's easier to cut a paperclip. A paperclip's not going to, say a whole lot.
Have a grievance.
Yeah, it's not gonna have a problem with you. It's just not gonna be there. So it's easier to cut a paperclip than it is a person. And I think overall, that's not a bad philosophy. I'd rather keep a person than keep a paperclip any day. People are delivering the service. We can figure out a way to stick things together other than maybe without a paperclip.
Let me touch on, there's 1,000 things we could go on for hours,
sure.
really, and I know, so we're trying to cram a lot in a small amount of time,
sure.
Otherwise I'd follow up. But one of the efforts at reform, and we talk about reform fatigue perhaps, but we
sure.
had George Bush's No Child Left Behind.
Right.
I'm not sure where that stands as far as rewriting that law. They're going to be maybe taking a look at it. In talking to some teachers, one of the common complaints I hear is that they say, we'd like to, as an English teacher, to teach kids about Shakespeare and all the stuff that we feel as English experts they should know. But that's not on the test, and we're being told just teach to the test so that our school comes out looking good.
Isn't that sad?
Is that a valid criticism of the reform? And
No Child Left Behind had great intentions. The idea was to focus on let's not let kids fall through the cracks. But the implementation and the processes that they used for No Child Left Behind were really flawed. The idea that we can make arbitrary growth with every child, regardless of their abilities or disabilities, that every child is going to perform at the same level, is simply not true. If you look at the human population on a bell curve, you realize that the bulk of the population sits here in the middle. And they have generally a lot of the same skills and opportunities and abilities. Then you have the outliers, both on the low end and the high end. And to say we're going to ignore science, we're going to ignore mathematics, we're going to ignore the bell-shaped curve and the distribution of that, and the distribution of people as a population, and we're going to cram everybody in the same box, and everybody's going to perform at the same level at the same time in their life, is ludicrous. That's just not well thought out, and it's proven not to work. We've seen this problem occurring as more and more school districts are labeled as failing, and I emphasize labeled, because we have a lot of good school districts doing good work, their kids are getting a great education, but they've got this arbitrary label due to this federal testing program that's labeling them as failing schools. What you'll find when you go to those communities, they may be labeled with that, but the people on the ground, the people in the community, the parents, the kids, even the school district leaders, the teachers, they know that school's not a failing school. They may have a label that somebody sent them from Washington, D.C., but they're not a failing school. And you can see that in their community and in their kids. So we do have reform fatigue. No Child Left Behind was due to be authorized in 2007. That's 4 years ago. It's still not been reauthorized. We thought it might get reauthorized this past summer. But unfortunately, some other things like the debt ceiling debate took over the entire Washington, D.C. landscape, pushed education off to the side, and it's probably going to stay off to the side for a long time because we have other pressing issues that take over in D.C. So reform fatigue, yeah, that can set in, but we need if we're going to have reform.
Does it burn out administrators and teachers where they're always being told to jump through new hoops?
You get to a point where you realize it's just another hoop game, and it's not well thought out, it's not well planned, and it's not going to have a good impact on kids. It's not even designed to have a positive impact. It's just a populist idea. I mean, the slogan of No Child Left Behind, who can argue with that? That's tremendous. So it becomes slogan-driven instead of results-driven. And I think we should be listening to the people, experts in the classroom, the teachers, the principals, and the superintendents that really know. They're trained on this. They've done this. They have experience. They see it every day. Those are the people we ought to listen to as what we should do in classrooms.
Should we scrap No Child Left Behind? And if we were to, going back to the example when I went and when I interviewed the administrators at the D.C. schools back in 2003, they were spending something like $13,000 a year per pupil. Extremely high on a per pupil spending basis, and yet 75% of those kids were performing below basic, which meant that they were functionally illiterate. how do we as a society, as taxpayers, measure the quality of the product that we get from our schools? And if we scrap a No Child Left Behind, which meant to, as I broadly interpret it, set some standards of judging, how should we judge it?
I think every child should be based on their growth, their individual growth from year to year. I definitely think accountability is important, but we have ridden the accountability idea to a point that it's no longer it's no longer valid because we have so many accountability points. It's just everything's about accountability. We need to recalculate and set our points here as to where we're going, and look at a child's abilities and look at their growth from one year to the next year. We have two federal laws right now that are in direct conflict with one another. One's No Child Left Behind, and one's the Illinois or the Individual Disabilities Education Act. It specifically lays out that some children have special needs, and we need to accommodate those special needs. And the No Child Left Behind says all kids are going to perform at this specific level, at this specific time in their life. That's in conflict with one another, and they're both federal laws. Those needs to be accounted for, and every child, whether they're a special needs child, a regular child, or a gifted child. We never talk about gifted children. We just let them do it on their own, and a lot of times they do it, which might tell us something. But we need to make sure every child has the ability to grow as much as they possibly can from one year to the next, and that's the accountability that I, as a taxpayer, would look for. If a child is growing year over year, then you're getting some bang for your buck putting it in public schools.
We often hear from business community that they are not getting the quality of product educationally, which doesn't apply merely to K through 12. And I should ask, your members, are they predominantly K through 12?
Yes.
Maybe entirely, I guess.
Well, no, we have some higher ed individuals that are members, mostly those that will be instructing master's and doctorate level courses at your state universities for school administrators. Many of them belong as members of ISA as well.
What would you want to, as we tape this, President Obama's on a listening tour. I think the listening is supposed to be more geared towards the economy, but
it is.
We also have the federal, the congressmen on their August break, and they're not really on vacation. I would say they're on recess from Washington, but they're out here in the district and listening to comments. What would you say on behalf of your members to improve the educational level of students? What would you say? Look, just focus on these things. And, well, let me let you answer that and I'll have a follow-up.
Well, I would never try to get into their business in terms of trying to tell them what their priorities should be.
But they might seek your judgment, saying
well,
you represent
I would be glad to talk to them.
What would, if they said, Brent, what do I need to, what would you tell me if I'm going to do 2 or 3 things that would really help you out? What would you have me do?
Well, there's no denying that our economy is really, really important. When families are not working, when unemployment's high, it creates stress on families, creates stress in communities, and that stress comes right to school. So you create stress in your schools. So certainly focusing on the economy, in my opinion, is very important, and I think that has to be a priority.
Because that would help with the whole budget process we talked about before.
It helps with everything.
Yeah.
And we've heard these lines over and over. From one election cycle to the next, it's the quote, it's the economy, stupid. So truly, the economy does have this paralyzing impact over so many things. So we have to get that squared away and get that on the right track first. Then a lot of other things can come along and be dealt with, and that will help. Education can be one of those things. But I would never try to say we've got to get No Child Left Behind reauthorized before we deal with the economy and unemployment rates that we're dealing with now. I mean, in my opinion, that's just not the right order. And education is really important to me, but I think the economy has such a paralyzing effect, and it reaches so many aspects of our life.
And as to say, socially in the classroom, it's not merely the dollars that it has that impact on us.
But when you have families that have children, and those children are coming to school, and mom and dad, or maybe half of mom and dad, one of the parents is unemployed or both are unemployed. That's tough. That's tough on the family. It's tough on the household. It's tough on those kids. There's so many social aspects to that as well as financial.
Going back and maybe anyway on the federal government again, you were saying the dollars that come to a district from the feds are relatively small.
Yes.
To the overall budget. On the other hand, we have the feds maybe high on the list of interference.
That's so true.
I've often thought, education, since we're funded predominantly, I think, right, by property taxes, local property taxes.
Well, it depends on where you're at. You can have a school district that's largely property tax, low state aid, low general state aid, or you can have a school district, all in Illinois, that's large general state aid and low property tax, based on the property wealth that sits within the boundaries of that school district. So we have all variations of that in Illinois. So you have these high property wealth, low property wealth districts. Sometimes they can be pretty close to one another.
I guess the thing is, if someone said in the federal government, they're certainly going to be going through cuts. If someone suggested, why don't we just do away with the Department of Education? I mean, we didn't have it years ago. It was an agency, or HES, Health and Education and something else I forgot. But should we have a Department of Education, or is it more problems than it's worth?
Probably a philosophical question, one that I haven't given a whole lot of thought to, so I wouldn't want to be on record saying I recommend we abolish a federal department. But, that's probably a discussion that could be had, and certainly want to carry out important aspects of title related issues, but and certainly the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that needs to be carried forward. But I don't know. That's a great conversation piece, and maybe one that
at least it's not an obvious choice. I mean, you're not saying
it's not
absolutely
yes or no.
We want to keep it.
No,
so
it's
it's
yes
something.
or no. I think it's something we ought to talk about, though, maybe going forward, particularly in the frame that you put it in. If we're going to have severe federal reductions, does this come into play? And it could.
Before we close out, we've talked about a lot of troublesome areas of education. Are there areas where you're particularly excited as you look to the future? Are there some new interesting trends that you maybe hear from other states or just from your memberships? Or
here's what I see. I think Illinois, by and large, is a very strong state. I know our finances, we get ranked 50th for our lack of budgeting at the state level, and our pension debts and other crushing bonded debtedness. But frankly, we're a pretty productive state, and we have great schools. I'm in and out of these schools all the time. I see what's happening on the ground. I talk to my counterparts in other states and see what they're talking about, what they're dealing with. What we're doing with curriculum and technology and our teaching and learning really heartens me to think that we're doing a really solid job in Illinois, and our kids are coming out with a bang-up education out of our high schools, and elementary schools feeding those. So I'm very optimistic about where we're going with education. I think Senate Bill 7 is going to take us another step. We saw a lot of collaborative efforts around the table from not only administrators, but from the folks representing the teacher organizations, IEA and IFT, those representing the reform people, those representing the legislature. Very collaborative process, working to build a better system. And so I'm very optimistic about where we're going with K-12 education in Illinois, and I'm a taxpayer too, and I like to see my money put to good use. So I'm very, very positive about where we're headed.
Well, Dr. Brent Clark, we appreciate your time. As we said, there's so many various issues here. We skimmed over a number of them, but maybe we can come back and talk to you again and get your thoughts as the year goes on.
We look forward to that.
Thanks so much.
Have a good day.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.